Max Blumenthal talking about the ADL. American Jews are poorly served by a malign lobby which acts in our name while embedding itself in Silicon Valley to suppress free speech, and which cynically defames U.S. critics of a foreign apartheid state. In the interest of reducing anti-Semitism, the ADL should be dissolved. And Max Blumenthal, I should note, is, and that is what he's saying about here. All right, so I guess we can go to Glenn's tweets since we use a lot of his video here. So right here, Glenn says, and he's basing it off of this, or actually, let me just read this first. Here's a pro-Biden account recalling, now this account right here is a pro-Biden account, recalling that CNN's primetime host, Kaitlan Collins, went on national TV a few years ago and said everything about George Soros that ADL and Dems now insist is anti-Semitic. Of course, that BS, but if CNN believes that, how do they justify this? So that's interesting. Let me play this. I haven't I saved it because of based off of the tweet, but I haven't actually listened to it. It's about 45 seconds. Let's listen.
Do with the immigration crisis.
Good morning. Okay, so George Soros is this foreign-born left-wing guy who essentially wants to change the nature of our country. And in this data dump, one of the memos was about the refugee crisis. And they made 3 points. They think that they've been successful at influencing immigration policy across the world. They think that the refugee crisis is an opportunity to continue doing so. And they think the refugee crisis is the new normal. And George Soros is this guy who is a staunch advocate for open borders. He wants people to be able to go wherever they want, whenever they want, for whatever reason. And for him, he sees this immigration policy, this crisis, as a vehicle to further his immigration agenda.
Wow, that's Kaitlan Collins. Wow, that is very, very, very interesting to hear that from her. Nothing goes away. A couple of more tweets on this topic here, ADL. Another one from Glenn. The ADL is a highly publicized group that they're now playing a central role in controlling the censorship framework makes that more true than ever. Every group and cause has bigoted elements, but it's unethical to exploit anti-Semitism to play ADL off limits from critique. And this is David French. Let's not pretend that what's happening here is some sort of thoughtful ideological critique of ADL. There's a tsunami of raw, unfiltered anti-Semitism on this platform. Decent people, right and left, should respond accordingly. There are competitors to this site. I don't know what this it feels to me like a very and I see my guest is here, feels to me like a very Twilight Zone moment. And maybe I'll bring my guest in because I'm sure he has some thoughts on this too, about the Anti-Defamation League. Chuck Modi is also Jewish, so I'm interested to get his perspective on this as I'm closing out this segment, but it's interesting to get his perspective. To go back to this tweet here, and I'm going to ask Chuck, I'm going to ask you this question also. I am not seeing all of these changes in Twitter that people are saying. Like, I don't see that. To me, Twitter is the same it was when I started using it 4 years ago as it is I'm using it today. I haven't seen an uptick. I don't see racism. I don't see the N-word. I don't see all of these things that is being referred to in this conversation. But Chuck, you're all set to go. Thumbs up, sir, if you're ready to go. You're all set. Okay. All right. So Chuck is all set to go. Let me bring in friend of the show. I would say just friend in general, and great advocate. You always see his videos Like his videos are the most the most detailed when he's reporting whatever he's reporting on. So what he's reporting on is not important, but like not the point that I'm making. It is important, but not what the point that I'm making is like he goes in depth. Like the interviews are more in depth, and that's what I like about a lot of his reporting. We're actually going to play a couple of his videos in the next segment with Cop City, but this is journalists, and I don't know how he's a sports journalist since I only talked to you about politics, but he actually is a sports journalist and activist. This is Chuck Moody. Chuck Moody, welcome to the show, sir. Welcome back. How you doing, sir?
Man, I'm doing great. CJ, great to be here as always.
Yes, and happy to have you back. And you got here right at the tail end of a story I was covering before the Cop City segment, and that is sort of the viral story that's going on with ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, and it was precipitated with a tweet by Elon Musk saying something that he's going to sue Anti-Defamation League based on Twitter's 60% revenue decline, based on ad revenue decline, and he's saying it's because of defamation from the Anti-Defamation League. I think I summed it up quite perfectly. Have you heard about the story? And if you have, give us your thoughts on what's going on and also your opinion on the ADL.
Yeah, you know, there are these times where you're a little bit in a bind. And what I mean by that in a bind is that in this story, some of the critiques that are made of the ADL are correct, but have to be framed correctly. I am no friend of Elon Musk. I'm going to tell you that right away. No friend of him. And a lot of people behind the ban the ADL hashtag, we have to be clear. They're neo-Nazis, they're white supremacists, and we have to name that. We have to call that out. And obviously, I'm against all forms of white supremacy. I'm against those individuals. I will fight those individuals in the street. So I don't want to miss anyone to confuse anything. Sometimes people are for something for the wrong reasons. And sometimes
I was just going to say that
for the right reasons. And so before I get into the ADL, let me give you an example. I'm anti-war, and I find myself, there are these far right-wing white supremacists who claim they're anti-war, and it seems like we're aligned, but we're not really aligned. See, I'm anti-war because I don't really want to bomb anyone. They say they're anti-war. They may want to pull money from Ukraine, but then start some stuff with China and bomb some Muslims instead. That's not the same thing. And I think we have to name those things and dig through those things when we have our critiques. So you have the white supremacist crowd, and you have Elon Musk going after the ADL, and ADL sometimes does go after white supremacists. They do that, but they're an overall net negative to civil rights. They're an enemy to civil rights. And I have to be clear about that, because we hear about speech suppression when it happens to the right wing. We hear because the right wing makes a lot of noise for themselves. The white supremacists make a lot of noise for themselves. When it happens to Palestinians, right? When it happens to people fighting for boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel, when it happens to vocal people against Israeli apartheid, when it happens to people who legitimately critique Israel and understand critique of Israel is not the same as anti-Semitism. And we get that just if we critiqued any other country. Well, those people have been banned. Those people have been put aside. Those people's speech have been marginalized. Those individuals have actually had laws against them, anti-BDS laws a few years ago, without a peep, without a sound. And the ADL is a big part of those laws, how they define anti-Semitism. So even when they say there are so many new cases of anti-Semitism, well, how are you defining it? Because I know when there's a Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, we all need to get behind that. And that was white supremacy who did that.
Right.
But after the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, we saw anti-BDS laws, pro-Israel laws, as a result by people who hijacked the white supremacy that killed the Jews and turned it into more oppression against Palestinians. And the ADL has often been behind that. They've been very pro-police, part of the deadly exchange where police officers here train in Israel so that they could oppress particularly black and brown folk here as they do Palestinians in Gaza. This is not a theoretical exercise, right? There's a direct link to that oppression. And that link is what I just named, part of that deadly exchange, but it is also the suppression of speech by defining anti-Semitism in such a way that conflates critique of Israel. So I have a ton of complaints of ADL, though that has nothing to do with the white supremacists.
That was a lot to break down, and I'm going to attempt to do so. One of your first points that we can have a critique of the ADL, and a group that we despise can also have a critique of the same group for a different reason, and we must make sure that people on the outside looking in understand I'm here for the fight from a different path. I came from a different route than those people here for this same fight. They came from a different place, and it is important to understand where people come from for this fight so that you understand. I mean, that's very important to understand.
That's exactly right. And I want to reiterate that point, because I think it's a point that we sometimes skip over in articulating. We sometimes skip over, and by skipping over, whether it's anti-war or whether it's against the ADL, by skipping over it, it is not educating people on the difference. And that difference is a critical difference.
Yes, and I'm trying to formulate this question here. Because it feels like there are, because for example, at the beginning of the show I played a couple of intro videos. Ben Shapiro, for example. Now he's conservative.
Yeah,
I played that video to get different perspectives, and I played a progressive guy, the politics guy, I think his name is, where both of them are talking against the ADL. So I kind of showed that difference where the conservative, but they are coming saying that the ADL, Ben Shapiro, for example, circles those conservative leaning and then even far right to racist sort of groups. They hate the ADL for a different reason. Can you speak on that? Now, why do those groups hate the ADL?
A lot of those groups hate the ADL because the ADL is very powerful. And they do, within their scope, go after white supremacists. They do that. And when I say white supremacists, I read Twitter. A lot of these people are anti-Semitic. They are coming from anti-Semitic. They're openly white supremacists. This is not like being hidden, right? So when I see this anti-Semitism and you're coming from that direction, I have to call it out, okay? But it doesn't mean that the critique of ADL as having an incredible amount of influence, like we say AIPAC, or like we say Christians United for Israel. People don't know how powerful they are, and they're Christians, right? We can't say that that's necessarily anti-Semitic, though we could look at who's saying it, and I could be like, okay, that group is anti-Semitic because I see all their tweets, right? They are.
Right.
But then somebody else may have a similar from the outside critique that's not anti-Semitic. That is simply a critique because you want Palestinians to be able to live free, to have liberation, right? And you have to have these critiques. So they get conflated. And even I tweeted and I retracted a tweet. Sometimes I do that because I might have tweeted and it might have been misinterpreted in a way that I didn't want. I was a little messy. I was a little loose. And if somebody tells me my tweet is being interpreted in a different way and I feel that it's wrongly interpreted, then I will delete it and try to make my language more specific, because I never want to.
About this topic? It was about this topic? Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Go ahead. What was that tweet? What was it? Go ahead.
I was making some of this differentiation above one of somebody whose critique was kind of right, but they weren't coming from the right place. And I didn't want to lend support, so I deleted the tweet and then really had a clarification. I do this now and then. My tweet, all of us have made tweets that are a little messy in our haste.
Yeah.
And
yes,
the wrong people jump on. And when the wrong people jump on, I want to be clear that, no, I wasn't speaking to you. I'm speaking to my Palestinian brothers and sisters who are catching hell, who are getting bombed, and this is that. So I think we have to name that, and then I could give my a little more nuanced critique of the ADL.